Hey, gorgeous. Welcome to Flamingo Up, the podcast where we help women rise, reclaim their voice, and take charge of their life and career. I'm Ali, founder of Empower Heard, where we support women in overcoming workplace challenges through coaching and community. Each week, we dive into real issues with expert advice and inspiring stories to help you shift from victim to victor. Today, we're talking about the impact of workplace tension on your mental health, and I cannot wait to dive in. So let's flamingo up, gorgeous. And joining me today is the amazing Dr. Jackie Layton, a licensed psychologist and founder of Mockingbird Therapy. Dr. Layton specializes in helping people navigate the pressures of workplace tension, stress, and burnout. Drawing on her own experiences overcoming toxic work environments and systemic oppression, she combines trauma-informed psychological science with anti-oppressive frameworks to help others reclaim their power, break free from unhealthy patterns, and build sustainable, values-driven lives, careers, and relationships. She is here to share insights on addressing bullying, managing stress, and creating a healthier work life. Welcome, Dr. Layton. I am so excited to have you here on Flamingo Up.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
All right, if it's okay with you, let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a question for you. So, from a psychological perspective, what are some of the most common signs that workplace tension is negatively impacting on someone's mental health?
Yeah. This is a really good question because it's so helpful for us to have a sense of what's going on for ourselves, and
Mm,
our bodies give us our first signs that something is not right. There's a couple of different areas that people will notice. Some of us are really in touch with shifts in our mood and emotions. So we might notice that suddenly we're feeling, sometimes it's low mood, sometimes it's just apathetic, just kind of that meh feeling more
mm,
often. Sometimes people notice that they're more irritable and angry easily. Other times it's that pit of dread in your stomach when you're going into work or when you're anticipating waking up and going to work the next day. Um, Confusion and embarrassment. So there's a lot of negative emotions that can start to build up that we notice. Not everybody, interestingly, notices the emotions first, though. Sometimes they'll notice the physical symptoms. So things like jaw, neck, and shoulder tension. As people are listening to this, you might even notice this yourself if you take a moment and take a breath in through your nose, filling your belly, and sigh it out through your mouth. You might actually notice too, like some areas of tension. There might be maybe your jaw was tense and your tongue was at the roof of your mouth. Maybe if you roll your shoulders, you might know your shoulders are tense.
mm.
Chronic stress leaves a lot of signs in the body. So, yeah, and I can happy to give a whole laundry list of things folks can look out for, but definitely signs in the body, signs in our emotions. We also can be less productive, we're just kind of our messier selves when we're
Mm.
stressed, right? Because so much of our energy is actually being drained in the background by what we're dealing with. So you might notice yourself being more forgetful, losing the keys more often, missing appointments or running late to things, wondering why you're so disorganized. You might find yourself making excuses and canceling plans with friends, withdrawing and preferring to just be left alone, scrolling, doom scrolling on your phone more. So, all of these kind of behavior changes, if we notice them in ourselves, I encourage you all to think of it as every behavior being a communication, right? That you're something about your body or your needs are being communicated through that, and to look at it curiously.
Yeah, I find it interesting that our body often knows first before our conscious
Yeah.
mind knows. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
When I work with a lot of women where it's um not only something that, everybody experiences changes in eating and appetite, things like that, but we'll also potentially notice it if there's changes unexpectedly in our menstrual cycles.
Mm,
Oftentimes that can be a sign of stress. Suddenly having headaches, just those the feelings that you would get if you were having a bad period, that can also be a sign of chronic stress. And is definitely any of those sorts of shifts are worth paying attention to because our body doesn't just do that typically out of nowhere.
No, it doesn't. So when we talk about chronic stress, how does chronic stress from a toxic work environment manifest differently in women, especially compared to men? And are there specific emotional or physical symptoms that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah. So, something I've noticed is that for a lot of the women I see who are going through toxic work environments, we have oftentimes less actual power and support in those work environments. So, there's not always as clear actions that we can take in the work environment, or
Mm,
we don't feel confident that we have people that we can talk to who will believe us and take it seriously. A lot of times when women are having difficulties in the work environment, it's fellow women, which brings in this kind of difficulty of um, not knowing what to expect socially. If you were to tell folks at work what you're experiencing, if you'll just be seen as emotional or immature or unprofessional rather than somebody who's experiencing inappropriate behavior that shouldn't have to be. There's also difficulties where a lot of times, a lot of women express that the folks that are causing them a lot of grief at work have power over them in some way. And so that adds a lot of problems. So with women, we see a lot more of these mental health impacts because it's a more powerless feeling stressor, right? So we tend to do better with stress when we see clear, actionable ways forward, which is part of why one of the first things I do with folks when they come in having this kind of stress is we figure out, okay, how do we help you feel heard, help you feel like you're not alone in this? And how do we help you have some sort of actionable strategies to build that sense of control, even in the littlest ways? Because yeah, women are having a lot less of that than men just because we already have a lot more that we're facing in a typical workplace, or more that we're having to overcome to reach the same outcomes in a typical workplace.
yeah, for me, I was told it was a personality clash, which I thought was
Mm,
quite interesting, right? That's another way of not dealing with the
yeah.
issue at hand. Like it's a personality clash when in actual
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah.
well, it's
They
not
they like
really.
to dismiss it like, yeah, like they dismiss it like it's like a mean girls thing or like they like to say these what we know in the research and the psychology to be not true, but there are these myths about just like women don't get along or things like that, which not only do we know that that's not really true, that's not accurate. But if you take a moment and think about who benefits from us thinking so, it's definitely not us,
No.
right? So but yes, there is a lot of dismissal when a woman comes in saying, hey, I don't feel safe or comfortable in this work environment. I'm feeling so stressed. I don't like how I'm being treated. She's more likely to be talked to like a kid who's not managing their emotions rather than an adult who's pointing to inappropriate or unacceptable behaviors in their workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I so hear that. And it's interesting that that happens to women, right? And it not just by men, but by other women. So if you go to another woman and, it's a personality clash, or you seem to have the problem, not that person, where it's, oh, I'm coming to you with my feelings and, you know,
Yeah.
I'm reaching out for help and you're basically being slapped back.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, can you talk about the connection between covert bullying and say subtle toxic dynamics and issues like anxiety or depression, and how these seemingly small interactions have a significant impact on mental health?
Yeah. Yeah. When you're right on about that, they do have a significant impact. One of the things I think of for this is how much time we spend per day in our workplaces with the folks that we're working with. And so it's not just that somebody is being rude, right? Like it's that it's probably something more like people talk about a coworker, a supervisor who repeatedly criticizes them in front of others, belittles or humiliates them. and they never know when it's coming, but they have to continuously be living in this environment, working in
Mm.
this environment throughout the day where the possibility is hanging over them, right? That there's not a lot of breaks from it. And it follows you, especially now as folks are increasingly working from home or sometimes taking our work with us from home. People are more and more accessing you outside of work, right? So people are getting these emails or messages from coworkers and bosses, even outside of working hours. We even see higher rates of bullying for remote workers. Like remote workers are
Oh.
experiencing higher rates of bullying. And if you think about that actual reality, that
Mm.
means that all throughout their workday, they're experiencing this, and then they're not even getting a clear break in the day where they can step away and be fully away from all things work and have a breath. Like it always is part of their reality that this bully is there in their life or this person who's harassing them is there in their life. And so, yeah, I think just the pervasiveness of it is part of what brings us to these feelings of anxiety and depression. It's taking up so much of our life.
Yeah, it's like walking on eggshells because you never know when that other shoe's going to drop.
Yeah, yeah. And it, in many ways, when you hear people describe living in abusive relationships, living in abusive homes, and the long toll that that takes because they're always walking on eggshells, it's the same thing, right? Our brain is reacting to it as the same thing, just continually being under this social, psychological, emotional threat.
Mm. And I think even when you transition from work to home, it carries with you, right? You don't, it's not as if you walk out the door and, hey, I don't have to think about it. You actually take that back
Oh,
into your home life, and then it has an impact in your home life as well as your stress and anxiety continue to build and grow.
yeah. Well, and you may have experienced this yourself. I know I certainly did, is that you don't just get to go home and be done with it. Like you end up talking to your partner about it and saying, "Oh my goodness, like today they did this, they did that. Like, what am I going to do about this tomorrow?" Right? Like you're processing it out, and so then you're losing precious home time where you're supposed to be living your own life and
Yeah.
you're processing all the stuff that's going on. The folks that I'm seeing, right? Like they're processing this during their precious therapy time that's for them and their well-being, and it's a great reason to use it, but it sucks that like they have to be spending that kind of time and energy healing from what this person or people are doing to them during their work days. Yeah, it's definitely robbing us of time and emotional health and well-being both in and out of work.
I hear you. For me, it was my neighbor. So my neighbor would come over, every afternoon, and she was my outlet. Like, right, when it's during the big height of it all, and that was my outlet. I had no one else to talk to. No one, she didn't know about my job, but she knew about, the interactions and that dread every morning. And if an email or a phone call or something, that was my person. But you're right. We
Yeah.
connected through that when we should have been connecting and talking about our lives, what was happening, broader picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and your instincts, I have to commend you on that. Your instincts on that are so good. One of the best things we can do when we're experiencing that ongoing bullying, harassment, is to connect with safe, warm community. So your instincts were right on to talk to the neighbor, to talk to a safe person. It reminds our nervous system that even though we're experiencing something that's very wrong at work, we are not actually alone, and this person doesn't actually have us in all areas of our life, right? So yeah, so I do think you were doing one of the most beautiful things you can do for yourself, which is seeking that community. It's just sad that any of us have to.
It is. And it's quite interesting because even though now that you've said that, you're right. I always thought that I was alone, right? You know, was because that's the feeling you get. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, it was like no one else knows what I'm going through. No one else could possibly understand. When in actual fact, that's completely untrue. I mean, we all face bullying, and we all go through something similar, But for some reason, you always think that you're the only person or you're so alone in this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's such a common thing we see with all abuse, right? It's made to have us feel small, feel alone, feel overwhelmed, feel powerless. And we're not. There's so many of us that have experienced going through this that would have so much empathy for this. Person after person comes into therapy saying that, expressing how alone they feel. And yet they're able to connect with a therapist who gets it. They're able to then connect with their friends who get it, the work buddies that they can exchange eyes with,
Yeah.
during the day that can get it and be like, I see it too, right? Like that helps. All of that helps to not feel alone in this, especially if you're in a work environment where it's dismissive of what you're experiencing, then it's like this natural gaslighting that's happening in there, right? That you need to counteract and show yourself, no, this is not okay. And if you think about like those moments you probably had with your neighbor, I would talk to and message a friend of mine at work throughout the day when the person that I had to deal with was engaging in all these just inappropriate, horrible behaviors. I would say like, oh, they just did this, and like, and the empathy that you get to see the person saying, that's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe she can do that, right? Like, that feels good. Like, it's not that you want a person to, you know, also feel bad with you. It's more just that you want somebody to acknowledge it, that it's like, okay, this is not okay though, right? I'm not the only one seeing this. And that
Yeah.
feels so good. Like, we're
I
social beings. We want that.
I really love that. Like you're correct. I never thought about it like that. I just needed somebody to acknowledge what I was going through and support
Yeah.
me. It wasn't about whether she could do anything, whether she could help, because she obviously, she could help me by supporting me. It wasn't about me. Now that I think about it, I needed someone to help in the workplace, but she gave me the more vital help, which was out of the workplace, disconnecting and, you know, accepting me as I was and helping me through that really horrific time.
Yeah. Yeah. She was giving you the thing our partners, like they're so amazing for. The thing that they're giving is whether explicitly or not, some part of us is, I think, getting from them that what I'm feeling is valid, that what I'm going through is not okay. And I am worthy of love, respect, and care, just like this person is giving me right now, just like I am giving me right now, right?
Yeah,
It's nice. All of these are just really important reminders. And it's all the opposite of what bullying tries to wheedle into our heads.
that's so true. So for many women, say the first sign of, like for me, one of the first signs of trouble was that feeling of dread you spoke about when I was thinking about work, like in the middle of the night, wake up with dread. So, what advice do you have for someone experiencing this, but who may not yet realize they're dealing with a toxic situation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. You've already started us off on that, the first step, which is noticing, right? Like if you notice a shift in yourself, listening to it and saying, okay, why am I feeling this way? If people like to normalize things we ought not to normalize, the Sunday scaries and things like that. If you're feeling dread, if you're feeling sick or miserable leading into going into work, that is not a good sign. And we should sit with that for a moment. And as uncomfortable as it is, part of you is probably not going to want to do this. I would encourage you to actually slow down with that feeling and pretend like you're holding it out in front of you and taking a look at it, inspecting it from all angles, right? Like, how am I feeling right now? Where am I feeling it in my body? Um, is there anything that this feeling tells me? Like, is there anything specific, any images or things coming to mind? Is there some sort of specific worry I have or um, anticipation I have? What am I being told here by my emotions and body? I know one of the things I used to notice is I had that dread when I was driving into work, and I
Mm,
started to notice like that I would start to feel just like actually nauseous on the way into work. And I started wondering if I was having some sort of issue. Like my first thought, even as a psychologist, my first thought was like, am I having the wrong breakfast? like, did I develop some sort of like, did I develop some sort of sensitivity to my breakfast? And so, even working in mental health, my first thought was to change my morning meal and like when I was having it. And when that didn't work, I thought to myself, okay, why am I being silly? This is also a somatic stress signal. Like, what could this mean? And I was thinking, what are the things that what are some of the things that have shifted at work? And I realized, oh, I have just been dealing with so much stress, so much just random, so many random little moments of sabotage, criticism, just
Mm,
annoyances that are more than annoyances, right? From this person. And just the thought of having to see her and deal with whatever it was going to be again this day had me feeling nauseous on the way into work. So when I noticed that, I was like, okay, what do I need? Because this is my system telling me that we're reacting to something that is that bad for us. And when I started thinking of that, it helped me clarify like I needed less stress in my workplace. I really love what I do, and I did not want to have these impacts from somebody. I needed to actually address it. I fell for the trap so many of us fall for, which is the idea of if I just do good work and I just, focus on what I need to do, it will go away on its own, which most of the time, actually, bullies thrive in the silence. They tend to um, escalate more often than go away when we just leave them to it and don't say anything and just try to focus on our work, unfortunately. So, as it started to escalate too, I was thinking to myself, what types of support do I need? What are the things that will help me feel safer at work or able to handle things at work? And it did get to the point where I thought to myself too, if I was my own, you know, knight in shining armor swooping in, doing something about this, like if I could magically come up with a solution to this, like what would it be? And there got to be a time where I started imagining, I don't want to work in this setting at all anymore. Why would I want to work in a setting where people are okay with one another, treating each other this way when we're supposed to be focusing on such important work? And that was a helpful turning point for me in leaving an unhealthy work environment for something much better.
yeah, I hear you. I used to drive to work and I had a song I used to play every morning just to get out of my head. And, I used to blast it. I'm sure, 5 cars around me could hear what was coming out of my car. It was the only
Yeah.
way I could calm my nervous system down enough to go, you can get through this. And no matter what she's cooked up overnight or has been planning for months, you can handle it. And
Yeah.
those sorts of, but you're
Yeah,
right.
I love that.
Yeah. And I used to put my headphones in, right? And just to drown out all the noise, like just to try and escape that environment. But in doing so, you are right, because by being silent, like I would then be wondering, what's she doing? What's she doing? What's she doing? Right. And that would then take over your thought pattern even while you're working and really then start to add another layer of, you just don't have your everyday work pressure of, getting your work done. You've got another layer of what's this person doing now that I've got my headphones in or, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, and there's kind of a belief that you can almost hear whispered underneath that behavior that we both did, where it's like if we just focus on our work, if we're just doing good work, minding our business, people will leave us alone. And it's this assumption that if you're doing good things and you're being a kind person, people will leave you alone. And it assumes that only the people who in some way do something wrong are getting bullied or harassed, when really anyone can be. There's not a um, we have there's been a lot of research actually that's tried to look at, who is getting bullied, who is getting harassed at work, because it is so negatively impacting for folks. Like folks experience such severe mental health concerns that to try to prevent this, they have tried to look into, are there folks that are more at risk for bullying than others? And it's pretty much like every other type of abuse and crime that no, they a lot of times the targeting and the bullying seems to be more about the bully themselves having difficulties with shame or insecurity, and the person they choose just is just the unlucky person they choose, that there's not really any anything that that person could have done differently that we tend to see. I think of some really lovely folks that are on my caseload right now that I'm seeing, and they're amazing. They're very kind-hearted, hardworking, focused individuals. Like they're exactly the kind of folks you would want to have as coworkers. And the level of harassment and bullying they deal with at work is criminal. And there's nothing about them that's bullyable, right? Like
Mm.
there's nothing about them that looks like a good target. It's just they just unfortunately have become a target of someone. And I think that when we tell ourselves, oh, I just need to do more, or I just need to, it suggests that in some way this is happening because of us. And it's really not, like, not at all.
It's not, bullying's never about the victim. It's always about the bully, right? And you're correct, like insecurities. And then their insecurities take over so much that their perception of another person then is what becomes the driver. So they perceive that other person as being better than them, or, whatever it is, having more power, or, having all the good ideas. And then their insecurities from wherever they're coming from then become the anger that's then directed towards that person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's really well said.
Thanks. So, just then, while we're talking about that, what are some practical self-care strategies or coping mechanisms that you recommend for women who feel emotionally drained by workplace tension but aren't ready to speak up or yet take action?
Yeah. So the first thing I think of is it can be helpful to do intentional journaling or documenting of some kind. So the intentional journaling side of this can be really helpful where you have a specific prompt you're speaking to, right? So when I say intentional journaling, I don't necessarily mean the mind dumps. Those can be lovely too. But what I'm meaning is checking in, like, what am I feeling today? What are my needs today? What are things I did well today? Right? Like, depending on what we're feeling, this can be a way that we help counteract some of the conditioning we're taking in. So when we are expecting somebody to criticize us unfairly, we can start to be really internally hypercritical, looking for any little thing we could be doing wrong that could set them off, right? So we start to gather all of this information about anything we could possibly be doing wrong, and we're not really paying attention to the things we're doing right. And the sad thing is like we ironically start to develop our own narrative of ourselves as less than, less competent, etc.,
Mm,
because we're in that defensive mode. So you can use intentional journaling to get back on your own side, to actually more actively and intentionally look at what am I doing right? And what are some things that went well for me today? And what have I specifically done to bring those about? What are things I'm proud of myself for today? Even the smallest things, right? Because it helps balance out so that you're also seeing the full picture and you're not giving yourself zero credit like some folks at work might be. Right. So, one of those things is get on our own side internally, get our clearer vision of ourselves. We may be being mistreated at work, but we don't have to agree with them. We don't have to take on their same mindset towards ourselves. We deserve better than that. So, that would be the first thing. Second is what you are, what you had done by instinct, which is community, connection, connection, connection. Like we need support. I would say as much support as you can find, whether it's from, safe and loving friends and family and neighbors, whether it's any allies and coworkers that you could connect with, any supervisors or mentors at work who could help hear about what's going on in the situation early on, because the earlier the better, to start
mm,
saying, hey, I'm noticing these specific behaviors. I'd be curious if you had any thoughts of, given your experience in this workplace, what might be the first thing you would do to address this, right? Like going and it that helps with a couple of things. One is it starts getting somebody aware early on in the pattern. So you don't have to come in once things are really, really bad and now catch somebody up and convince them that this is a thing, right? Like they've already been seeing the pattern over time, potentially even intervening a little
mm,
over time, right? So it gets those allies on board earlier on. And this can also help them with trying to set some clearer boundaries, see if there's any allies that can jump in right away and stop it from being even worse. Um, it can also get you information sooner. If you're going to be all alone in this workplace, if you notice that you're dismissed and people are really not here, it gives you that information right away that, hey, everything I'm dealing with here too, they're not helping. Do I need to think about talking to HR, talking to a therapist or a coach outside of my workplace, even talking to legal support, right? Like some sort of legal consultation. Because if you know that you're not getting support within this workplace, that makes them, you know, enablers of the abuse. And you do not deserve to live in abuse. So that's where we get to decide early on, okay, do I need to take some support and action outside of this workplace too to make sure I'm keeping myself safe?
Absolutely. I love your intentional journaling because I'm going to be honest, I was a brain dumper, right? I
Yeah.
brain dumped every morning before I went to work, pages and pages and pages, just to have it out of my system
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
calm me down before I went into the office. I am now an intentional journaler without realizing I'm now an intentional journaler, right? So I gauge my energy that morning. Where am I sitting on my energy levels? How can I increase my energy? What's my top project today? You know,
Mm.
gratitude and affirmations, and then brain dumping.
Yeah.
So really being intentional about setting my day up for success as opposed to brain dumping, which worked for me at the time and what I needed at the time, now is on a different level.
Yeah. Because at the time, what you needed was for these things to be heard. And now what you need is for balance and self-love and self-care. Right.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. That's a really great example.
Yeah. So intentional journaling and community. Amazing.
Intentional journaling, community. Yeah. And honestly, too, there's a lot of really helpful ways that we can practice different communication skills and boundary skills, but it just really depends on the environment and the situation. For some folks, it actually might not be safe to try
Mm,
to engage in these skills directly with them. It might not even be worth trying. And, depending on the type of behavior you're dealing with, the person you're dealing with. So sometimes it's actually just more useful and effective to take those skills to the people that you're getting support from, like a supervisor where you want to point out clear, as objective as possible. I know it's not objective because we're feeling it all, but trying to point out as much as possible the specific facts of the situation and what this is causing for you in your workplace, and trying to say it as factually as possible, not because you don't have a right to be flowing these emotions forward and saying this is awful, right? And maybe even crying it out or whatever it might be, but because people tend to be more likely to listen from a allying with you and a less self-defensive space if you start with shared neutral facts and then talk about how if they were to support you or help you in this, here's how it's helpful for both you and them, right? To like remember what are the things that they would get out of putting this time in. We'd like to think that folks will just help because it's the right thing to do, but sometimes managers, supervisors, and anyone else, they might be having a lot on their plate and they may or may not care that much about their job. I don't know how well it even pays them, right? So like it can be also helpful to mention some of the benefits in it for them that, you know, if I had more support, if I like one of the ones I used at the time was I'm noticing that this person has started to request um, updates and information with this much frequency during the day from me, which is not particularly effective. And it is causing me these impacts on my productivity and it's making it really stressful unnecessarily. If you want me to be able to be doing more and showing up as my best self at work so that we're getting the best uh, client care so that I'm being able to see the most clients and be
mm,
able to, see the most students that I'm supervising, I would really like to establish an in writing different approach to managing my work. And here's my suggestion that I think would work for all of us, and then waiting back for that negotiation, right? So I brought that in, and before I did this, I went to my friends and I got mad and I cried and I, said some choice words about this person, but I didn't bring that to the supervisor. I brought the supervisor my proposition that I thought would benefit all of us involved and make for a healthier, more productive work environment. And that's what they had the capacity to care about, right?
Yeah, I actually, you've just made me think about my own situation during that, and how emotionally charged I was in the beginning, and then towards the end, being really emotionally disconnected because I had the support of that neighbor, and because I was just able to constantly download, and her support through that, as well as my parents' support, and a few other people. I was able to then make that decision that I'm not really enjoying this. And the only way for me now to not take this on board is to no longer care. Instead of taking it all on
Yeah.
board, like it was all me, I needed to do all this stuff. I then started showing up with I'm emotionally not even engaging anymore and
Mhm.
completely detached from the situation, which then was interesting, right? Because by doing that, I was then complimented of how my communication was so much better by being
Mhm.
emotionally detached. And I thought, I know my communication is a lot better. My emails were better, those sorts of things. I get that. But what you're not seeing now is that I don't care anymore. And it just
Yeah.
became that real wow. It was a wow moment for me that this is the person that I have to be told that I'm now communicating more professionally. Whereas, well, hang on,
Mhm.
I'm not caring anymore. So what do you want? Do you want us to care and care to the point where, we doing extra hours, we're doing all this other additional work, or do you want me to not care and have professional emails?
Mhm. It really calls out what their values are in different workplaces. That if they're happy with you being professional and don't care whether or not you are doing well, you are feeling well, you are liking the job, it says a lot about that workplace.
Mm,
And as much as it absolutely is miserable to have that realization, and it's so sad to me that the amount of stress you were going through, your
mm,
mind was like, we just have to check out in some way or another. And if we feel we have to keep physically showing up to this job, then we're going to mentally check out. So I get the self-defense, and it breaks my heart that that's how stressful this experience was for you, that your system was trying to protect you from it by mentally and emotionally checking out. And it also makes me sad that that workplace is okay with that, right? Like it's okay to get your productivity. It was okay having your toxic stress and shutting down and losing the joy or connection you could have had in a workplace. Like that is really sad. And it says a lot more about your workplace and the people you were working with than about you. But it's very sad.
well, I'm really grateful for it, though. I have to say, I'm really grateful. And I tell everybody I'm grateful, for what happened. Maybe not for as long as it went on because I didn't recognize the signs at the time, which is why this entire podcast now exists for women like you and me who weren't sure if is this what is this? It's not right. I can't put my finger on it and I can't name it. And when we can just say you're in a toxic work environment or you're being covertly bullied, because we're all taught about the aggressive bully. We're never taught about the subtle undermining stuff that happens that, over a period of time amounts to bullying. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
crazy. So
Well, and
we
something I would wonder about this
mm,
is the thing I would ask then is, are you grateful for the experience you had to go through, or are you grateful for the beautiful part of yourself that rose up, found resilience, created community and meaning, and started to help other people who are going through this? Like, I wonder if you're really
Mm.
grateful for the trauma you went through, or if you're actually grateful for that part of you that saw the storm and said, I will not bow to this. Like, I will rise
Yeah.
above this in some way.
I'm grateful for both because without the trauma, I wouldn't be where I am. Without being grateful for that and having experienced it, I couldn't speak on a level that I speak on without, telling my story, trying to take my own life multiple times, and the stress the almost being an alcoholic, really closing myself off, having no friends, having, barely talking to my family. Without all that and having those feelings, I'm grateful because otherwise as I said, I could not be able to speak and be on a level with victims who are going through something, whether it's just as bad as mine, whether it's worse than mine, whether it's, just on the surface, having experience. And it brought me to where I am today. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
here unless I had all those experiences together. So as a whole, I'm grateful that, yes, it happened and I got through it. I'm grateful that I found my voice and thought, no, I'm not going to just get another job and be quiet and never speak my truth. Like I made a choice and said, this is never going to happen again.
Yeah. I love that from all of this pain, that part of what brought you from such a place, right? Like the level of hopelessness and powerlessness we feel when we have thoughts of suicide,
Mm,
right? That how scary that is. And to come from that place and not just heal from that, but find your voice and then rise to this place of saying, I also, I don't just want to climb the ladder of healing and pull it up behind me, right? Like I want to help other folks. I remember what it was like to feel alone in that when I was at work and feeling alone, and you want and you're hoping that maybe somebody will be listening into your podcast and they'll hear it and it will be exactly what they need to know that they're not actually alone. That, hey, this gal gets it. Like, listen to how she's putting it. Like, Ellie's saying it in a way that is exactly what I'm feeling. And I'm hoping that, yeah, I'm hoping that helps somebody else too. And I think it will. But I definitely want to witness you in that really lovely finding of your voice in all of this. That's a pretty incredible thing.
uh,
Not everybody comes out of stress and trauma with that, right? Like that was hard earned.
mm. I really appreciate that coming from you. Like I know what you've been through. We've talked about your story. So we talk on a level
Mhm.
where, people who are watching, Jackie is also a victim of workplace bullying.
Mhm.
So this is not just an expert coming. This is a lady who's also gone through and experienced what I'm talking about and on her own level and had her own journey through this. So I am really grateful for you being here and actually opening up about that. So because I think people will hear your story as well and be like, well, it's not just me, it's happening to everyone. And my biggest dream is that all the victims started speaking. We would drown out the noise from the bullies because there's so
Yeah.
many more of us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. That's a really lovely thought. And yeah, I think it also is a nice reminder. Like when I was experiencing workplace bullying and harassment, um, I was already a practicing psychologist, seeing people for that very thing in therapy. And so yeah, there's not some secret sauce, some secret method to
Mm,
prevent yourself from ever being bullied. I feel like if somebody were to know, I would have, you know, found it. So in all of the work that I do. And so yeah, no, it was um even knowing and being able to I might have been able to name it a little faster than I would have if I hadn't already been seeing folks who had such similar stories to mine that I could in my mind resonate with. But in the end, my way of identifying it is the same as everybody else's, right? It's hearing those collective stories. I was, in this case, realizing the things that I was feeling, the things that I was experiencing. It's like, this sounds familiar. I have worked with other women who have gone through this. I'm going through it too now. And this is workplace bullying. This is workplace harassment. Noticing things like uh, I'm being held to different standards of work than my colleagues, that my promotions and raises take longer than male colleagues, even though I
Mm,
was more qualified than the folks who were getting them sooner, and I had earned it sooner. So, like all of these things, I was like noticing these just layering things that, yeah. And the thing that pointed out to me wasn't some part of me from grad school that was like, oh, well, that fits the definition of like, no, it was the part of me that was like, I've heard this story from another woman who came in and saw me for therapy. And what did I call it in her chart? I called it harassment. I called it workplace bullying. So that must be what this is.
yeah, that's really interesting. And I really appreciate you giving that depth of knowledge that, even though you are a psychologist and, a fantastic one, by the way, because I know that
So sweet.
even, it all comes back to the body, right? It all comes back to your system telling you something, and you need to start picking that up. You need to start really listening to yourself, because your body knows before your mind knows what's happening.
Yeah.
So, but if we've got so here, okay, I do have a question for you, because we've kind of talked about managers and leaders. So if they're listening, what could they do differently to support their team's mental well-being, do you think?
Yeah. There's actually a whole lot that can be done at a managerial and team level. There's less that can be done actually at an individual level because the individual is not the problem. So there's so much that we can do to actually make healthier work environments. One of the first things is you actually can set communication norms in work environments. You can set transparency norms in work environments and specific norms and rubrics around how people are evaluated. And you can bring in a lot more fairness and transparency into a work environment where it makes it harder. You're never going to 100% prevent bullying, harassment, but you can make it a lot easier to show when it's happening, a lot easier to catch when it's happening by making things as clear and transparent as possible. Um, I was working with some members at a law firm, and we were talking about some of the ways that there were a couple of individuals who were just dumping workloads on just one or two people. And it was
Mm,
the more we looked into this environment, we realized just how unhealthy and just how much bullying was going on in this environment. And one of the ways that we started creating a safer environment for everybody is setting norms for like prioritizing urgency, for instance. Is this a code red, a code orange, code yellow, right? Like where is this at? And having specific standards for what counts as this level of urgency. So basically, if somebody wanted to say, hey, I need you to do this, it's the highest level of urgency, they had to explain why it was that highest level of urgency.
hmm,
And it was documented that this person was handed this thing with this highest level of urgency. And then, like, we also implemented these kind of shared calendar systems so we could see who's getting what work and how much. It's not perfect, but it's better for being able to see, you know, is somebody getting handed a lot of the same type, right? Because one of the MOs that people have for workplace bullying is to hand a lot of the really crap tasks to a particular person, that somebody is getting a disproportionate amount of the really unpleasant, really difficult, challenging tasks. So they were able to make all of these things very transparent. Like you could see who exactly was getting assigned what tasks. If somebody was overly assigning certain tasks to somebody, you can even go in with a neutral stance saying, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you just assigned this 3 times in a row to so and so. And those are not fun to have to do. That paperwork is a nightmare. So why don't you make sure you send those to the next people on the line for, the next month. Like, don't send any more to that person so we don't overwhelm them. And you can actually track these behaviors. And then if somebody's actually trying to do it intentionally, it becomes very obvious because they're breaking protocols that have been put into place. Same with protocols about communication that you can set. You can say that things should be in writing or that after meetings we'll send summaries. If certain folks are feeling uncomfortable or unsafe around folks, they can say, I want to have our conversations in writing or in the team calls, right? So that everybody can witness how the interaction is happening, and that lessens how much power they can have. So there's all kinds of different things that can be done from a team level that an individual who's being bullied would never have the power to make happen.
Yeah, I also bring in for me is values, right? People's values and the company values, because every company, every organization has, a set of values that they require their employees to live by. And one of the big ones is, respect is always usually in there. And we're seeing that these people aren't living to the company values. So that's an easy way just to pick out, who isn't playing fairly, as we say.
Yeah. And then having clear actual enforcement of those values, right? So if somebody is engaging in behavior that causes harm, actually having that be a priority, that that person is sat down with, that they talk to them, figure out what's going on, they come up with a way to change the behavior, and they have a follow-up to make sure the behavior has changed.
Yeah.
And actually following through on that, because if you notice that people are if you notice that people are not following these norms that are set, they immediately lose any and all power or meaning, right? Like if we don't hold people to it, it's kind of like laws. If we don't enforce them, they don't mean much, right? Which is part of the issue we actually have, and that's that a lot of folks feel like workplace harassment and bullying is not that nothing's done about it, nothing's enforced, that any sort of aggression or violence against them is not going to be enforced. And that is essentially saying we don't care that it happens, right? And we need to make cultural changes, team changes, community changes to make it actually a safe environment. No one person can change a whole system and have the whole system start to care or be safe. It's just beyond any one of us. But a team of us, a whole culture at a workplace, leadership that gets to kind of direct the ship, right? Like that they have the power to actually make changes and make a much healthier environment. And they should, not just on a human level, but also, when I've had to try to sell it to folks, I've shown them the numbers. You have better productivity, you have lasting employees, you have employees who are less likely to be showing up late, calling in sick, right? Because stress impacts our immune system and our productivity and our willingness and ability to show up, right? Our willingness to stay at a job. So it does benefit the business in a lot of ways too, to be human friendly.
So based on your experience then, what's one key practice that a woman could start implementing today to safeguard their mental well-being in a high stress environment?
Mm-hmm. I would say connect with specific community in that environment. Like a lot of women in tech, for instance, will talk about how they notice all of these unhealthy or unwelcoming sorts of patterns. And typically in these environments, there already are women's groups where they can join. They can get a mentor who's a woman in that workplace. They can get information and connect with others. And essentially, it helps make up for all of the ways that they're often passed over or left out and excluded by men who tend to hand all of the assignments and the fun things to other men, right? So it helps connect with other women so that you can actually have resources, you can actually have community too. People can give you a heads up. Hey, here's what worked for me to talk about this, or here's a thing that I found helpful, or here's a manager who will actually listen and care about your safety, right? Like connect with community so you don't have to reinvent the wheel for your own health. You shouldn't have to figure out the whole lay of the land yourself. Connect with the group of women at that workplace so that you can find information and safety in community.
Yeah. Allies, right? We're talking about allyship. Just
Yes,
finding,
exactly. Mhm.
yeah. And it's quite interesting because I didn't do that. I did the opposite. I secluded myself. I
Yeah,
really,
well, that's a stress response, right? Like the stress response is to want to withdraw and seclude ourselves.
mm,
It's a self-defense. If it's not safe to be connecting, or if you're going to be dismissed potentially or emotionally hurt, of course you want to shut down and pull away. And yeah, it's very hard to do. When I say join community right away, part of the reason we do that is that it's a lot easier to join community before you start experiencing harassment, stress, and harm when your body wants to shut down, right? It's a lot
yeah.
easier to form it beforehand. You still can after it, just it's pushing a boulder up a hill is all.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. So, can you recommend any resources, books, apps, or other support networks that you know of that our listeners can turn to if they're struggling with the emotional impact of a toxic workplace?
Yeah, there's actually so many different resources. I was kind of torn on this was something where I had anticipated. I was trying to think of what books or things I would mention. And honestly, the things that I've found most helpful haven't even necessarily been specific to bullying per se. It's things like some of the books I absolutely love. Actually, I have them here, so I can some of them. Um, these honestly nearly all, but some of the
I love how they're just sitting right there, but like behind, so you know where they are at all times. It's like,
these are the good old trustees,
yeah,
yes. And there's some more that but I think so. Some of the ones that I would recommend is it's actually not even about bullying. It's more about like thinking about taking back your power. So I absolutely love Untamed, Glennon Doyle, classic.
yeah,
When I was experiencing stress, bullying, like beautiful. It's really helpful for tapping into that part of you that wants that encouragement, wants to really rise, like find your voice like you did, right? That
yeah,
Glennon Doyle's of the world, right? So tap into fellow strong and encouraging women in books like that. Brene Brown has a lot of really lovely works too that can be helpful to read. I also love, I really have always, I really like the One Wild and Precious Life.
Oh, I've never seen that one
I do,
before.
yeah, Sarah Wilson, I really like the kind of casual style that she has as she's grappling with some of these bigger things that we're
Mm,
dealing with. And something about it that I found comforting is, and this is like this whole type of book, it's more about this idea of what are the greater things that we want in life, the greater systems that we're living under. And it helps take our minds back to the bigger view, right? This is not somebody bullying you because there's something wrong with you. This is an unhealthy system that you're living in. And what do we actually want for ourselves in these systems? What are the things we want for ourselves in greater life? Because work doesn't get to be our whole life. It's
no.
just a slice of it. It's something we can leave, it's something we can change. It doesn't get to own us. Um, for things that are also that kind of leads into if you haven't have you read Rest is Resistance by
No,
Trisha
I
Lucy?
haven't. I'm going to pick up a copy though.
Yeah, so good. This is another one of those where it's a great reminder that sometimes some of the most beautiful resistance we can do to unhealthy systems is to actually reclaim ourselves, our rest, and our joy. And then, of course, the last one I'll mention is the Nagoski Sisters Burnout Guide. This is also really helpful for just breaking through stress in the workplace, but also in general. I feel like they write it in a really nice and approachable way. So yeah, the I tend to put my favorites visibly on the shelf behind me because I've noticed that as soon as my clients realize that it's not a AI background, they'll actually pay attention to what books I've put behind me and tend to get them and read them. So I want to make sure they've got good options that I keep right there.
And what we'll
Yeah.
do is I'll actually drop the links for those books into the show notes. So everyone who wants to take a look at them, we'll have links for you in the show notes. I
Yeah.
love ending on a hopeful note, and those book recommendations were absolutely fantastic. I was hoping that we'd have a little bit more in common, and I had one, not all three, all four of them. However, you've now given me three more books to add to my bookshelf, which is
Yeah.
already overflowing, which I'm sure yours is as well. And it's just
And
crazy.
this, do you have the thing where you have the stack of books to read that you buy because you're so excited and then you've just been meaning to get to them? Because yes, I have my forever stack of like the book hopefuls where as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to get to those too. And
It's on
there's
my
so many
desk.
more.
It just sits there, and it keeps adding another book to the top of it. And then I'll find that my partner will actually come and put them all away on the bookshelf because it just
Oh,
the stack gets too big, right? Because you go,
yeah.
I want to read that, and it takes a while to read a book,
It does. Yeah. I absolutely am so impressed by folks who really carve that time out still in this today's world to rather than scrolling, crack open a book at the end of the evening. I mean, it's great for our sleep and stress reduction to read a physical paper book with soft, warm lighting, not blue lighting at the end of the night. It helps kind of with the lower lighting, with the soothing activity, the not getting all of the wake signals from a screen. It tends to be really helpful for us falling asleep. But I also know that on a practical side, like life's a lot. Like life's a lot. Some people are doing the best that they can. But yes, if you're ever wanting to read some great books and you're wanting to improve your sleep, I recommend reading them at night with warm lighting and a cozy blanket right before bed.
And that's another beautiful self-care tip for anyone going through this situation, right? It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
book about bullying or bettering yourself. It could be any book.
Mhm.
Just pick up any book,
Yeah.
whether it's, Mills and Boons. I don't even know if they're still around, but whatever it
Yeah.
is, just find a book and sit down and take yourself to another place. Let your mind and imagination go to that other place.
Yeah, let yourself connect with humanity and community because most of it is good and waiting for you. Only this one person, or maybe a couple of people, depending on how crappy your situation is, are actually contributing to all of this stress. And it's nice to remind ourselves the context, right? How small they are as a group compared to all the other humans and folks out there that are decent and mean one another well. And I think that, yeah, transporting into these books, especially these where I feel like they're just fellow heart led, impact led women who are doing exactly what you're doing, right? Like they're trying to share stories and thoughts with other women to help lift each other up. And that's why I love reading their words. I find a sense of genuine community in their pages, even though, it's one way. They don't know who I am, but I appreciate them and I send them my warm vibes from afar.
I'm sure they know who you are because you've just mentioned them here, which means I'm going to tag them all now when we launch this podcast. And I'm going to say, Dr. Jackie Layton's giving you a shout out on the podcast today.
Yeah, that's very sweet.
You're welcome.
I hope they hear it with all of our appreciation. And same for you. I really appreciate what you're doing with this show. The idea of what you're putting out there, the empowerment for fellow women, and it's hard to share your story the way that you're doing, this very vulnerable, very painful thing you've been through. And I think it's just absolutely beautiful of you to put this out there in hopes of, helping other people in such a real way. Like I'm so floored and in admiration for what you're doing.
I feel the same about you. And I feel for you coming on as, I mean, I know I've said this to you before, and and quite a few times potentially. For you, for your profession and what you went through, and you showing up and not being afraid to share your story and helping other women and recognizing and getting them to recognize it a lot earlier than potentially they would have been able to recognize it. And really sharing those insights are things that I wouldn't have known, right? They're, intentional journaling. Didn't know anything about it. Brain dumping was my thing. Though, sitting down with, I knew about the book thing. I didn't specifically know about the book thing, right? I thought just no blue light at night. I didn't know that reading gets you into a deeper sleep because I read in the morning. Like that's when my brain's active, but I'm usually trying to read other books, study books or whatever it is, not take myself off to a lovely place of imagination book, which would probably be perfect at night for a better sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just anything that puts you into that kind of soothed, not too activated, just kind of a warm, calm place that if you think about how we feel when we're looking at art, how we feel when we're reading something where you're like, oh, that's nice, or that's an interesting thought, right? Like how our nervous system settles in that. Any of that. It's just giving yourself that kindness, letting yourself slow down. And yeah, lots of ways to do it. But yeah, and certainly if this is helpful too. I mean, I'm always trying to post and share information related to this. And so happy to like be a source of free resources and information on that. Folks are welcome to see the humble amount of stuff that I put out online because it is with this hope that somebody will see it and find it helpful at the right place and time.
I love the work that you do and all the free resources you put out. You are genuinely there to help people get through their situations with genuine care and love and compassion for that person. Every person that walks through your door, you've got that genuine, and that's like your secret sauce. Because I've been to psychologists, right? No, they don't all have that secret sauce, which is when you walk in, you immediately feel that that person is there for you. They're in your corner. And that's what you bring to your clients. And that's what you brought to me when we met. So I just cannot, I've got so much admiration for what you actually do and how you have, what you've endured and how you've come out the other side.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means so much to me. Thank you.
So I really want to thank you today for sharing your insights, your expertise, and your part of your story with us today. I know for me, I have found this conversation incredibly valuable. There are things that I did not know, and I am sure our listeners as well will find this conversation incredibly valuable. Now, before we wrap up, I just want everyone to know that I will be in the show notes. You can find how you can access Jackie's website and follow her on social media as well. So go and take a look at those. Jackie, again, thank you so much for this incredible conversation. I know it's going to resonate deeply with so many of our listeners who are just starting to question their own work environments. If today's episode has hit home for you, then make sure you tune in next week. Our next episode is Finding Hope, how others moved from pain toward healing. It's all about sharing inspiring success stories from women who've turned their painful workplace experiences into powerful journeys of healing. We'll dive into their stories, offering you hope and practical steps to find your own path to recovery. Thank you again for joining me today on Flamingo Up. Remember, you have the power to rise, reclaim your voice, and thrive. Flamingo Up means standing tall, owning your space, and facing challenges with grace and strength, just like a flamingo. If today's episode resonated with you and you're looking for more support, I would love to invite you to the Be Heard community. It's an intimate group where I offer live coaching every Wednesday, helping you take these insights even further. You can find the link to request an invite also in the show notes. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss an episode. Together, we can continue our journey of growth and empowerment. Keep flamingoing, gorgeous. I will be your sparkle sidekick.